There is a quiet contradiction inside the human body that most people never notice. Each night, when you believe you are finally resting, your body becomes more active in ways you cannot feel. Systems begin to adjust, repair, and reorganize without asking for your attention. Yet this process is never fully complete. It does not finish, and it does not stop. What feels like rest may actually be a continuous cycle of correction, as if something is always slightly out of place. If the body keeps returning to balance, why does it never seem to stay there? Before we begin, hãy thả lại phần kiến thức phía sau chắc chắn xứng đáng. Why your body never stops resetting. At night, when the body becomes still at night, it creates a quiet impression that everything inside has also slowed down, as if rest means a temporary pause in activity. But this impression does not reflect what is actually happening beneath the surface, because even in the absence of movement, the body continues to adjust itself in ways that are small, continuous, and necessary for survival. And this pattern is not something modern life introduced. It can be traced back to the earliest conditions in which humans existed, where rest was never completely safe and never entirely separate from the need to remain responsive to the environment. So the body evolved not to shut down, but to shift into a different mode of regulation, one that maintains awareness at a low level while reorganizing internal systems. And this is where the idea of resetting begins to take shape, not as a single event, but as a process that unfolds gradually throughout the night, guided by mechanisms that do not aim for perfection, but for temporary balance. Because balance in biology is not a fixed point. It is something that must be constantly re-established. And each time it is reached, even briefly, the conditions begin to change again, requiring another adjustment, and this continuous need for correction is rooted in the basic structure of living systems, where internal stability depends on responding to external variability, such as changes in temperature, light, and resource availability, all of which shaped the way early humans experienced night, long before artificial environments reduced those fluctuations. And if we look at archaeological evidence from early human shelters or open-air sites, we do not find conditions that would allow for uninterrupted rest. Instead, we see signs of exposure to shifting climates, irregular sleeping surfaces, and the constant presence of environmental noise, all of which suggest that the human body adapted to rest in a way that was compatible with uncertainty, rather than insulated from it. And this adaptation is still present today, even when the environment appears controlled, because the internal systems that regulate sleep and recovery continue to operate under assumptions formed over long periods of time, where night was not a complete break from the demands of the day, but a different phase of engagement with those demands. And within this phase, multiple processes begin to align in cycles that are sensitive to timing rather than duration, meaning that the body does not simply use the night to recover. It follows a sequence of adjustments that depend on signals such as darkness, reduced activity, and internal chemical changes. And these signals do not trigger a final state. They initiate a series of transitions, each one preparing the conditions for the next. And this is why the feeling of rest in the morning does not necessarily indicate that the body has finished resetting. It only reflects that certain thresholds have been temporarily reached, enough to support wakefulness, but not enough to eliminate the need for further adjustment. And this pattern becomes more noticeable when sleep is disrupted, because the body does not stop the process, it redistributes it, attempting to maintain balance under altered conditions, which can lead to a sense of incompleteness or lingering fatigue, not because something has failed entirely, but because the sequence has been interrupted and must be reconfigured. And this reveals a deeper characteristic of the human body, that it is not designed to achieve a stable, final state of rest, but to move through cycles of partial restoration that are always influenced by both internal history and external context. And when viewed from this perspective, the idea that the body never stops resetting is not a flaw or a limitation. It is a reflection of how life maintains itself over time, through continuous, quiet adjustments that rarely reach completion, but always remain sufficient to carry the organism into the next cycle of activity, just as it did for early humans who moved between light and darkness without ever fully separating rest from the conditions that required it in the first place. And in that sense, every night is not a full reset, but a continuation of a process that began long before the present moment and extends beyond it into the next day. As the night continues, the body does not move toward a single point of completion, but instead shifts through layers of regulation that overlap and influence one another, and this layered activity can be understood more clearly when we consider that the body is not trying to repair everything at once, because such a goal would not be compatible with the conditions in which human biology developed, where energy was limited and environmental stability could not be assumed. So instead of pursuing total restoration, the body distributes its effort across time, allowing different systems to adjust in sequence and sometimes in parallel, guided by signals that rise and fall gradually rather than switching on and off. And this is why the idea of a nightly reset is better understood as a pattern than a destination, because each cycle of sleep contains multiple phases, and each phase emphasizes different processes, some related to physical restoration, others to neural organization, and others to maintaining internal balance in response to subtle changes that continue even in stillness, such as fluctuations in body temperature, shifts in fluid distribution, and the slow movement of chemical signals through the bloodstream. And none of these processes fully complete within a single night, because they are designed to be revisited repeatedly, adjusted slightly each time, and carried forward into the next cycle. And this design reflects a deeper principle in biology, where stability is maintained not by reaching a fixed state, but by continuously correcting small deviations. And these deviations are unavoidable because the body is always interacting with its environment, even in sleep. And if we return to the conditions faced by early humans, we can see that night was not a uniform experience. Temperatures could drop unpredictably, sounds could signal potential danger, and the surface beneath the body could shift or provide uneven support, all of which would require the body to remain responsive at some level, even while appearing to rest. And over time, this led to the development of a system that balances two needs that do not fully align: the need to reduce activity and conserve energy, and the need to remain capable of responding to changes. And the result is a form of rest that is inherently partial, where certain systems reduce their activity while others become more active, and this selective activation allows the body to manage multiple priorities without committing fully to any single one. And in this context, the sense that something is always left unfinished is not a sign of inefficiency, but a consequence of how the system is organized, because finishing everything would require conditions that rarely exist in nature, such as complete safety, stable temperature, and uninterrupted time. And without those conditions, the body instead adopts a strategy of ongoing adjustment, where each night contributes to a broader process that extends across many cycles. And this can be observed in the way the body responds to accumulated changes over several days, rather than within a single period of sleep, suggesting that the reset is distributed not only within the night, but across time itself. And this perspective helps explain why even after what feels like sufficient rest, there can still be a sense that the body is not fully restored, because the thresholds that define enough are flexible, influenced by recent activity, environmental exposure, and internal variation, all of which continue to shape the process as it unfolds. And when viewed in this way, the night is not a boundary that separates activity from recovery, but a phase within a continuous cycle of regulation, where the body moves through states that are always in transition, never fully settled, and always preparing for the next adjustment, just as it has done across generations, adapting to conditions that required flexibility rather than completion. And this is why the resetting never truly ends, not because it fails, but because it is designed to continue. As the final hours of the night approach, the body does not arrive at a finished state, but begins another transition that prepares it to return to wakefulness. And this transition reveals something essential about how the resetting process works, because it shows that the goal is not to complete a cycle, but to remain within one, moving from one phase to another without ever reaching a point where no further adjustment is needed. And this becomes clearer when we consider how the body shifts toward morning, not through a sudden change, but through gradual signals that begin before awareness returns, such as the slow rise of alertness, the adjustment of hormone levels, and the reactivation of systems that were operating differently during the deeper stages of sleep. And these changes do not erase what happened during the night. They build on it, carrying forward the partial work that has already been done. and leaving other processes to continue into the day, which means that waking up is not the end of resetting, but a change in how it is expressed. And this continuity can be traced back to the earliest human environments, where the boundary between night and day was marked by light, but not by a complete shift in safety or stability, because early humans often moved through cycles of rest and alertness that were influenced by external conditions rather than fixed schedules, and this required a body that could remain adaptable, capable of shifting its internal state without relying on a single, complete reset. And over time, this adaptability became embedded in the way the body organizes its functions, so that even in modern settings, where night can be more controlled, the underlying structure remains the same, with no clear endpoint to the process of adjustment, and this is why the feeling of being rested does not always align with the actual state of the body, because that feeling is based on thresholds that allow for functional wakefulness, not on the completion of internal processes. And those processes continue quietly, adjusting to new inputs as the day begins, responding to movement, light, and activity, all of which introduce new variations that must be managed. And this creates a continuous loop, where the work of the night feeds into the demands of the day, and the experiences of the day shape the next cycle of night, forming a pattern that does not close, but extends. And within this pattern, the idea of a final reset becomes less meaningful, because there is no point at which the body is free from the need to adjust, and this is not a limitation, but a reflection of how living systems maintain themselves over time, through ongoing processes that are designed to remain flexible rather than complete. And when viewed from this perspective, the night is not a solution to imbalance, but a phase in which certain kinds of adjustments become possible, while others are postponed or carried forward. And this layered continuity is what allows the body to function across changing conditions, preserving enough stability to support awareness while remaining open to further change. And this balance between stability and adjustment is not resolved at any single moment. It is maintained through repetition across nights and days, just as it was in the earliest stages of human existence, where survival depended not on achieving a perfect state, but on sustaining a process that could continue without interruption. And in that sense, the body does not wake up as something newly restored, but as something that has been gently reconfigured, ready to continue a cycle that never fully resets and never fully ends. If the body is always moving toward balance but never fully reaches it, then the idea of a completed state begins to lose its meaning, because what appears as stability is often only a brief moment where opposing processes happen to align, and this alignment does not last, not because something is wrong, but because the conditions that support it are constantly changing, both inside and outside the body, and this pattern can be understood through the principle of maintaining internal balance, where systems regulate temperature, energy use, fluid levels, and countless other variables within ranges that allow survival. But these ranges are not fixed points. They are flexible boundaries that shift depending on context, and even small changes in the environment can move the body slightly away from one position and toward another, requiring continuous adjustment. And this is not a modern problem. It reflects conditions that shaped early human life, where food availability, climate, and physical demands varied from day to day, and the body could not depend on reaching a stable, unchanging state. So instead, it developed mechanisms that favor responsiveness over completion, allowing it to adjust quickly rather than settle permanently. And this responsiveness is still present today, even in environments that seem stable, because the internal processes that manage balance are always active, responding to signals that may not be consciously perceived, such as slight changes in light, subtle variations in temperature, or the gradual depletion and replenishment of energy stores. And these processes do not pause when the body rests. They continue to operate, recalibrating internal conditions in small increments, and this incremental adjustment means that the body is always slightly ahead or slightly behind an ideal point that it never fully reaches. And this is why the sense of being fully restored can be difficult to define, because the criteria for that state are not absolute. They depend on how well the body is able to meet the demands placed on it at a given moment, and those demands are always changing, influenced by activity, environment, and internal history. And when we consider this over longer periods of time, across generations, we see that human biology has not evolved toward perfect stability, but toward the ability to function within variability, to remain effective even when conditions are not ideal. And this is reflected in the way the body organizes its nightly adjustments, not as a final correction, but as part of a continuous process that extends beyond a single night. And this process is shaped by patterns that have existed since early human environments, where nights were not identical and days did not follow a fixed rhythm, and the body had to remain adaptable, capable of recalibrating itself under changing conditions. And this adaptability is what prevents the resetting process from ever being complete, because completion would require a stable reference point that does not exist in dynamic systems, and instead, the body operates within moving targets, adjusting its internal state in relation to shifting conditions, and this creates a form of balance that is always temporary, always subject to change, and always dependent on ongoing regulation. And within this framework, the idea that the body never stops resetting becomes less about an unfinished task and more about a continuous function, one that supports life not by reaching an endpoint, but by maintaining the ability to respond, adjust, and continue across time, just as it has done since the earliest stages of human existence, where stability was never guaranteed, and adaptability was the only reliable strategy. And in that sense, the absence of a final, complete state is not a failure, but a defining feature of how the body sustains itself. When we look more closely at how the body maintains this moving balance, it becomes clear that no single system works in isolation, and no adjustment happens without influencing others, because the body is organized as a network of interdependent processes, where changes in one area ripple outward and require further corrections elsewhere, and this interconnected structure makes it impossible for the body to arrive at a final, complete state, since any shift towards stability in one system can create a new imbalance in another, and this dynamic can be observed in even the most basic functions, such as the regulation of body temperature, where maintaining a narrow range requires constant input from circulation, metabolism, and environmental interaction. And each of these contributes to a balance that is never static, but always being recalculated. And the same pattern appears in energy use, where the body continuously adjusts how it stores and releases energy, responding not only to current needs but also to recent history, such as prior activity or food intake. And these adjustments do not resolve into a stable endpoint, because the conditions that shape them continue to evolve. And when the body enters the night, this network of processes does not pause, it shifts into a different configuration, redistributing its activity while continuing to monitor and adjust internal conditions. And this redistribution reflects a strategy that has deep roots in early human environments, where rest had to be compatible with uncertainty, and where maintaining readiness was as important as conserving energy. So the body evolved to keep multiple systems partially active, even during periods of reduced movement, allowing it to respond to changes without delay, and this partial activation means that no system is ever fully finished with its work, because it must remain available to adjust again if needed. And this is especially important when we consider that many internal signals do not follow simple, predictable patterns, but fluctuate in response to subtle cues, such as changes in light exposure, ambient temperature, or internal timing mechanisms. And these fluctuations require the body to remain flexible, adjusting its internal state in ways that are small but continuous. And this flexibility comes at the cost of completion, because a system that remains adaptable cannot fully settle into a final configuration, and instead, it maintains a state of readiness, where adjustments can be made quickly and repeatedly, and over time, this creates a pattern where the body is always in the process of becoming balanced, but never fully arrives. And this pattern is not unique to modern life. It reflects a long history of adaptation to environments where conditions were rarely stable, and where survival depended on the ability to respond to change rather than to achieve perfection. And when viewed through this lens, the nightly resetting process becomes part of a broader system of continuous regulation, where each adjustment is both a response to the past and a preparation for the future. And this dual role prevents the process from ever reaching a point of completion, because there is always another variable to consider, another signal to integrate, another small shift to correct, and this ongoing activity is what allows the body to maintain coherence across changing conditions, preserving enough stability to function while remaining open to further change. And in this way, The absence of a final state is not a limitation, but a necessary feature of a system designed to operate in a world that is constantly in motion, just as it has been since the earliest periods of human existence, where the ability to remain adaptable was more valuable than the ability to reach a fixed point of rest. As this network of interdependent systems continues to adjust through the night and into the day, another pattern begins to emerge, one that extends beyond a single cycle and becomes visible only when we consider time across many nights, because the body does not treat each period of rest as a separate event, but as part of a longer sequence where changes accumulate, overlap, and influence future adjustments. And this accumulation means that what the body does tonight is shaped not only by what happened during the day, but also by what was left incomplete from previous nights, creating a form of continuity that prevents any single cycle from standing on its own. And this is why the idea of a complete reset within one night becomes difficult to sustain, because the body is always carrying forward traces of prior states, whether in the form of lingering chemical signals, altered energy levels, or subtle shifts in internal timing. And these traces do not disappear when sleep begins. They are integrated into the ongoing process of regulation, guiding how the body distributes its efforts and which adjustments take priority. And this process reflects conditions that were present throughout early human history, where cycles of activity and rest were influenced by factors that extended over longer periods, such as seasonal changes, variations in food availability, and shifts in environmental stability, all of which required the body to operate across multiple timescales rather than resetting completely within a single night. And this multi-layered timing is still embedded in human biology, where different processes follow different rhythms, some adjusting over hours, others over days, and others over even longer periods. And when these rhythms intersect, they create patterns that cannot be fully resolved within a single cycle, because each system is operating according to its own timing while still interacting with others, and this interaction produces a form of balance that is always in motion, where adjustments made in one cycle are refined or modified in the next. And this ongoing refinement is what allows the body to adapt to changing conditions, but it also ensures that the process never reaches a final state, because there is always another layer of adjustment that remains in progress. And this can be felt in subtle ways, such as the gradual recovery from extended activity, or the slow return to equilibrium after disruption, where the effects are not resolved in one night, but unfold over several cycles. And this unfolding reveals that the resetting process is not confined to the boundaries of sleep, but extends across time, linking nights together into a continuous sequence of regulation. And within this sequence, the body is not aiming to return to a fixed baseline, but to maintain a moving balance that reflects both recent history and current conditions. And this moving balance is what allows the body to function across variability, preserving enough stability to support daily activity while remaining adaptable to future changes. And when viewed from this perspective, the absence of a complete reset is not an oversight, but a reflection of how the system is designed to operate, continuously integrating past and present, adjusting in small increments, and carrying those adjustments forward, just as it has done since the earliest stages of human existence, where survival depended not on finishing a process, but on sustaining it across time. And in that sense, each night is not a fresh start, but a continuation, a quiet extension of a process that never fully closes and never truly begins again, because it has always been in motion. When we shift our attention away from the internal processes of the body and look outward toward the environments in which early humans spent their nights, a different layer of understanding begins to appear, because the way the body resets cannot be separated from the conditions that shaped it over long periods of time. And those conditions were not quiet, controlled, or predictable, but variable, exposed, and often uncertain. And archaeological evidence from early human sites suggests that places of rest were rarely uniform, sometimes consisting of simple ground surfaces, sometimes modified slightly with natural materials, and often located in open or semi-sheltered environments where temperature, sound, and light could change throughout the night. And within these settings, the body could not rely on a stable external framework to support uninterrupted rest, so it adapted by developing internal systems that could maintain function even when external conditions shifted. And this adaptation did not aim to eliminate disturbance but to absorb it, allowing the body to continue its processes without requiring perfect stillness or complete isolation. And this is important, because it suggests that the resetting process was never designed to operate under ideal conditions, but under conditions that included interruption, variation, and partial exposure. And if we imagine the experience of an early human lying on uneven ground, with changing temperatures and intermittent sounds, the body would need to remain responsive, capable of adjusting muscle tension, monitoring the environment at a low level, and shifting internal priorities as needed. And this responsiveness would limit the extent to which any single process could proceed to completion, because the system as a whole had to remain flexible, ready to adapt if conditions changed. And over time, this led to a form of rest that is inherently dynamic, where different systems engage and disengage in patterns that reflect both internal needs and external signals. And this pattern is still present today, even when the environment appears more controlled, because the underlying mechanisms have not been replaced. They have only been layered with new conditions, and this creates a situation where the body continues to operate as if variability is expected, even when it is reduced, maintaining cycles of adjustment that do not depend on complete stability. And this can be observed in how sensitive the body remains to changes in light and temperature, even subtle ones, which can influence the timing and quality of sleep, not because the body is malfunctioning, but because it is responding to cues that have historically been relevant. And these responses are part of the same system that drives the nightly reset, linking internal regulation to external context, in a way that prevents the process from becoming fixed or fully complete. And when viewed through this lens, the idea that the body never stops resetting is not only a reflection of internal biology, but also of a long interaction with environments that required constant adjustment, where rest was always partial, always contingent, and always integrated with the need to remain aware. And this integration is what shaped the structure of sleep itself, not as a single block of inactivity, but as a sequence of states that can accommodate both restoration and responsiveness. And within this sequence, no state is final, no adjustment is permanent, and no cycle fully resolves, because the conditions that define them are always in flux, just as they were in the earliest periods of human existence, where the night was not a protected space, but a continuation of the same world that required attention during the day. And in that world, the body did not learn to finish its work, it learned to carry it forward, one adjustment at a time. As night deepens within those early environments, the body does not simply endure the surroundings, it begins to organize its internal activity around them, using external variation as a reference rather than something to eliminate. And this relationship between body and environment becomes especially visible when we consider how sensitive human biology remains to light and temperature, two factors that have always changed predictably, yet never remained constant. And in prehistoric settings, the gradual loss of light at sunset did not create an immediate boundary between activity and rest, but a transition period where the body began to shift its internal timing, guided by decreasing light rather than complete darkness. And this shift is still present today, where the body responds not only to the presence or absence of light, but to its intensity and timing, adjusting internal signals in response. And these adjustments are not instantaneous, they unfold slowly, preparing multiple systems for a different mode of operation. And at the same time, temperature changes would begin to influence the body in subtle ways, as cooler night air required adjustments in circulation and energy use. And these adjustments were not isolated, they interacted with other processes already in motion, creating a layered response that could not settle into a single stable state. And this layering is important, because it shows that the resetting process is not driven by one signal, but by the convergence of many, each one contributing to a gradual reconfiguration of the body. And within this convergence, the body does not wait for ideal conditions. It adapts to whatever conditions are present, allowing processes to proceed even if they must be modified along the way. And this adaptability reflects a long history of exposure to environments where consistency was rare, and where the ability to adjust continuously was more valuable than the ability to complete a process under perfect conditions. And when we consider archaeological findings that suggest early humans often slept in groups or near sources of heat and shelter, we can infer that the environment provided partial support, but not complete isolation, meaning that the body still needed to remain responsive to external changes, such as fluctuations in temperature or shifts in sound, and this need for responsiveness shaped the way internal processes were organized, favoring flexibility over completion. And this organization persists today, even in environments that are more controlled, because the underlying systems continue to respond to cues in ways that reflect their origins. And this can be observed in how even small changes in room temperature or light exposure can influence sleep patterns, not because the body is overly sensitive, but because it is designed to integrate these signals into its ongoing regulation. And as a result, the resetting process becomes distributed across multiple layers, each one adjusting in relation to both internal timing and external conditions. And these layers do not align perfectly. They overlap and shift, creating a pattern where some processes advance while others pause or adapt. And this misalignment prevents the body from reaching a final, completed state, because there is always another adjustment taking place in response to a different signal. And this continuous interaction between body and environment reveals that the night is not a neutral backdrop for recovery, but an active participant in shaping how the body resets, influencing the timing, sequence, and extent of internal adjustments. And when viewed in this way, the idea that the body never stops resetting becomes inseparable from the environments that have always surrounded it, where change is constant, and where the ability to respond to that change defines how rest itself is experienced, not as a fixed state, but as a moving balance that is recalibrated again and again across each night, just as it was in the earliest human settings where stability was never assumed and adaptation was always required. As the night moves toward its later hours in those early settings, the environment does not become more stable. It often becomes more unpredictable, with deeper drops in temperature, longer stretches of darkness, and a different pattern of sounds. And within this shifting landscape, the body continues its internal adjustments without ever reaching a point where it can fully disengage from its surroundings, because the conditions never allow for complete separation. And this ongoing interaction between body and environment leaves a trace in how sleep is structured, not as a single uniform state, but as a sequence of changing states that reflect both internal timing and external influence. And within this sequence, periods of deeper disconnection alternate with periods of lighter responsiveness, allowing the body to move between internal focus and environmental awareness without fully committing to either. And this pattern can be understood as a form of compromise, where the body balances the need to carry out internal processes with the need to remain capable of responding to changes outside. And this balance does not resolve into a final state, because the environment continues to shift, requiring the body to adjust again, even within the same night. And if we consider the surfaces on which early humans rested, often uneven, sometimes hard, and rarely insulated, we can see that the body would need to make small physical adjustments throughout the night, redistributing pressure, altering posture, and maintaining circulation. And these adjustments are not interruptions to rest. They are part of how rest is maintained under variable conditions. And this further supports the idea that the resetting process is not something that occurs in isolation, but something that is continuously shaped by interaction with the environment. And even when external disturbances are minimal, the internal systems that evolved under those conditions continue to operate in the same flexible manner, creating cycles of activity that do not depend on perfect stillness. And this flexibility is what allows the body to maintain function across a wide range of conditions, but it also ensures that no single cycle can bring the system to completion, because there is always another adjustment required, another signal to integrate, another variation to respond to. And this becomes especially clear when we consider that the body does not wait for morning to begin preparing for wakefulness, but starts this process while still within the night, gradually shifting its internal state in response to both internal timing and subtle environmental cues. And this gradual transition means that the resetting process overlaps with the preparation for activity, further blurring the boundary between rest and engagement. And this overlap is not a flaw, it is a reflection of how the system is organized, designed to move smoothly between states rather than to stop and start abruptly. And when we place this pattern within the broader context of human history, where nights were rarely uniform and days were not always predictable, it becomes clear that the body developed a way of resting that is inherently dynamic, capable of adjusting continuously without relying on fixed conditions. And this dynamic structure is what allows the resetting process to persist without end, not because it fails to complete, but because it is never meant to, and in that sense, each night does not close a cycle. It extends one, carrying forward adjustments that began before and will continue after, just as it did for early humans whose rest was always part of an ongoing interaction with a world that never stood still. And within that interaction, the body learned not to finish its work, but to keep it moving, quietly, continuously, and without a final point of arrival. As the focus shifts from the external environments of early human nights to the internal sense of time that guides the body, another layer of the resetting process becomes visible, one that does not depend directly on what can be seen or felt, but on patterns that unfold within the body itself. And these patterns are shaped by the regular alternation of light and darkness, which has remained one of the most consistent features of the natural world across human history. And rather than responding only to immediate conditions, the body begins to anticipate them, adjusting its internal state in advance of expected changes. And this anticipation is not precise or fixed. It is flexible, shaped by repeated exposure to cycles of light and dark that vary slightly from day to day and across seasons. And over time, this has led to the development of internal timing systems that coordinate multiple processes, aligning them loosely with the external world while still allowing for adjustment. And this coordination is often described as a daily rhythm, but it is important to understand that it does not operate like a clock that reaches a final position. It functions more like a continuous signal that rises and falls, guiding transitions without bringing them to completion. And within this system, the onset of night does not trigger a single event, but a gradual shift in internal activity, where signals associated with wakefulness begin to decrease while others associated with rest begin to increase. And this shift unfolds over time, influencing different systems at different rates, so that the body does not move into a uniform state, but into a layered one, where some processes are still active while others begin to slow. And this layering reflects conditions that were present in early human environments, where the transition from day to night was not abrupt, but gradual, shaped by the fading of light rather than a sudden absence. And this gradual change allowed the body to adjust incrementally, preparing for rest while still maintaining a degree of responsiveness. And this pattern remains embedded in human biology, where internal timing systems continue to operate even in environments where light can be controlled artificially. Because the underlying mechanisms are not dependent on modern conditions, they are rooted in long-term exposure to natural cycles, and this is why the resetting process is not confined to the hours of sleep, but begins before sleep and continues after waking, following a pattern that extends across the entire day. And within this pattern, no single moment represents a point of completion, because each phase transitions into the next without fully resolving. And this can be observed in how the body prepares for sleep long before it occurs, adjusting temperature, energy use, and internal signaling in ways that are subtle but continuous. And these adjustments do not end when sleep begins. They continue to evolve throughout the night, guided by the same internal timing system that initiated them. And this system does not aim to bring the body to a final, stable state. It aims to maintain coordination across changing conditions, allowing different processes to align when possible and adjust when necessary. And this coordination is what allows the body to function across cycles of activity and rest, preserving enough stability to support awareness while remaining adaptable to variation. And when viewed from this perspective, the idea that the body never stops resetting becomes closely tied to the nature of time itself within the body, not as a series of separate events, but as a continuous flow of transitions that never fully settle, just as they have never fully settled in the long history of human interaction with the natural cycles of light and darkness, where each night was not an isolated period of rest, but part of an ongoing rhythm that shaped how the body organizes itself across time. And within that rhythm, the resetting process is not something that begins and ends, but something that is always in motion, guided by signals that never reach a final point, but continue to rise and fall without conclusion. As this internal sense of time continues to guide the body through the night, it becomes clear that the signals shaping these transitions are not rigid instructions but flexible tendencies. And this flexibility is what allows the body to remain aligned with a world that is never perfectly consistent, because even though the cycle of light and darkness repeats, its exact timing and intensity can vary, influenced by seasons, weather, and geographic location, and in early human environments, these variations would have been noticeable, with longer nights in colder periods and shorter ones in warmer times, and the body could not rely on a fixed schedule, so it developed timing systems that adjust gradually, recalibrating themselves in response to repeated exposure rather than enforcing a strict pattern. And this recalibration does not happen all at once. It unfolds over multiple cycles, with small shifts accumulating until the internal rhythm aligns more closely with external conditions. And during this process, the body does not pause its resetting. It continues to operate within the current alignment while slowly adapting to the next, creating a situation where multiple layers of timing coexist, some reflecting recent patterns, others reflecting longer-term adjustments. And this overlap prevents the system from ever reaching a final, stable state, because there is always a degree of adjustment still in progress. And this is especially evident when the timing of light exposure changes, even slightly, causing the internal signals that guide sleep and wakefulness to shift in response, not instantly, but over time. And during that time, the body must manage the difference between its current state and the new pattern it is moving toward. And this management requires continuous adjustment, as processes that were aligned with one timing begin to shift toward another, and this shifting is not synchronized across all systems. Some adjust more quickly, others more slowly, creating temporary imbalances that must be corrected gradually, and this gradual correction is part of the resetting process, not separate from it, and it reflects a deeper principle, that the body is not designed to lock into a perfect rhythm, but to remain capable of adjusting its rhythm as conditions change. And this capability has roots in early human life, where environmental cycles were reliable in pattern but variable in detail, and survival depended on the ability to track those patterns while adapting to their variations. And over time, this led to a form of internal timing that is always slightly in motion, never fully settled, and always responsive to new input. And this responsiveness ensures that the resetting process cannot come to an end, because the signals that guide it are themselves changing, rising and falling, in ways that require continuous recalibration. And when viewed from this perspective, the night is not a fixed interval in which the body completes its work, but a phase within a larger flow of time, where internal and external signals interact to shape ongoing adjustments. And these adjustments do not resolve into a final state. They carry forward into the next cycle, influencing how the body will respond to the following day and night. And in this way, the resetting process becomes inseparable from the body's sense of time, not as a static schedule, but as a dynamic rhythm that is constantly being tuned, just as it has been throughout human history, where each cycle of light and darkness brought subtle differences that required the body to adjust again and again, without ever reaching a point where no further adjustment was needed. And in that continuous tuning, the process of resetting finds its true form, not as something that finishes, but as something that persists. As this internal rhythm continues to adjust itself in response to light and time, another detail becomes clearer. The body is not guided by a single, unified signal, but by multiple overlapping rhythms that operate at slightly different speeds. And these rhythms do not always align perfectly, because each one is influenced by different factors, some more sensitive to light, others more responsive to activity, temperature, or internal states. And this creates a situation where the body is always coordinating between signals that are close, but never identical. And this coordination requires constant adjustment, because when one rhythm shifts, even slightly, it can affect how others behave, and this effect does not resolve immediately, it unfolds gradually, as the body attempts to bring these signals into a workable alignment. And this process of alignment is not about reaching a perfect match. It is about maintaining enough coherence for the system to function, and this distinction is important, because it explains why the body can feel out of sync, even when external conditions appear stable. And this sense of misalignment is not a failure. It is a reflection of how the system operates, always negotiating between multiple internal timelines that are influenced by both present conditions and past patterns. And if we consider how this might have functioned in early human environments, where daily routines were not fixed, and exposure to light varied depending on movement, shelter, and season, it becomes clear that the body needed to manage these overlapping rhythms without relying on precise synchronization. And over time, this led to a structure where flexibility is built into the system, allowing it to tolerate small differences between rhythms without collapsing into disorder. And this tolerance is what allows the resetting process to continue, even when conditions are not ideal, because the body does not require perfect alignment to proceed. It works within a range of acceptable variation, adjusting as needed to maintain balance. And this adjustment is ongoing, because the rhythms themselves are always shifting, influenced by new inputs and ongoing processes, and this creates a continuous flow of minor corrections where the body moves toward alignment without ever fully arriving. And this movement is especially noticeable during transitions, such as the shift from night to morning, where different rhythms begin to change at different times, creating a layered transition that does not resolve into a single, unified state, and instead, the body carries forward these partial alignments into the next phase, where they continue to be adjusted in response to new conditions. And this pattern reflects a deeper characteristic of biological systems, that they are designed to function within variability, not to eliminate it. And this design has roots in the long history of human adaptation to environments that were never perfectly consistent, where the ability to remain functional across shifting conditions was more important than the ability to achieve a stable final state. And when viewed through this lens, the idea that the body never stops resetting becomes closely tied to the presence of multiple internal rhythms that are always in motion, always interacting, and always requiring adjustment. And within this interaction, the process of resetting does not come to an end, because the conditions that drive it are never fully resolved. They continue to evolve, just as they have throughout human history, shaping a system that is defined not by completion, but by continuous coordination, where each moment leads into the next without ever closing the cycle. And in that ongoing movement, the body maintains itself, not by finishing its work, but by keeping it in motion. When attention turns inward toward the brain during the night, the idea of rest begins to change again, because what appears as quiet from the outside does not reflect a true reduction in activity within, and instead of shutting down, the brain shifts into a different mode of operation, one that is less focused on immediate interaction with the environment and more focused on internal organization. And this shift is not absolute, it is gradual and layered, unfolding across the night in patterns that have been observed in widely accepted studies of sleep, where different stages are associated with different kinds of activity, some involving slower, more synchronized patterns, others involving more complex and variable signals. And these patterns do not represent a simple progression toward completion, but a series of transitions that revisit similar processes in slightly different forms, allowing the brain to adjust and refine its internal state over time. And one of the most consistent findings is that sleep is involved in the consolidation and reorganization of information, where experiences from the day are integrated into existing structures, not stored as fixed records, but adjusted in ways that make them usable in the future. And this adjustment does not happen all at once. It unfolds across multiple cycles, with different phases contributing in different ways, and this distribution of effort reflects the same principle seen in other parts of the body, where processes are spread out rather than completed in a single interval. And this spreading is important, because it allows the brain to remain flexible, capable of modifying its internal organization as new information becomes relevant. And this flexibility comes at the cost of completion, because a system that remains open to change cannot fully settle into a final state, and instead, it maintains a balance between stability and adaptability, preserving enough structure to function while remaining capable of adjustment. And this balance is shaped by conditions that extend back to early human environments, where the brain needed to manage information that was often incomplete or uncertain, and where the ability to update internal representations over time was more valuable than the ability to fix them permanently. And during the night, this need for ongoing adjustment becomes more visible as the brain revisits patterns of activity that reflect recent experience, adjusting connections in ways that are subtle and continuous. And these adjustments are influenced by internal timing, but also by the broader context of the organism, including energy availability, prior activity, and environmental cues, all of which shape how the brain allocates its resources. And because these factors are always changing, the process of internal organization cannot reach a final endpoint. There is always another layer to refine, another pattern to adjust, another signal to integrate, and this ongoing activity is not limited to memory. It extends to the regulation of attention, perception, and other functions that depend on coordinated activity across different regions. And this coordination is maintained through continuous interaction, not through a fixed configuration. And as a result, the brain does not emerge from sleep as something fully reset, but as something that has been reconfigured just enough to support the next period of activity, carrying forward adjustments that will continue to evolve. And when viewed in this way, the nighttime activity of the brain reveals that resetting is not about returning to an original state, but about maintaining a process of change that allows the system to remain functional across shifting conditions, just as it has done throughout human history, where the brain adapted not to finish its work, but to keep it moving, quietly, continuously, and without a final point of completion. As the brain continues this internal mode of activity through the night, another process unfolds alongside the reorganization of information, one that is less visible but equally central to understanding why the body never fully completes its nightly reset. And this process involves the gradual clearing and redistribution of substances that accumulate during periods of wakefulness, not in a single sweeping action, but through slow, repeated movement that depends on the state of the brain itself. And research that has been widely accepted shows that during certain phases of sleep, patterns of neural activity change in a way that allows fluid to move more freely through brain tissue, carrying away byproducts of normal cellular function. And this movement is not constant, it varies across the night, influenced by shifts in brain activity, circulation, and internal signaling. And because of this variability, the clearing process cannot be completed in a single continuous flow. It proceeds in intervals, advancing in some phases, slowing in others, and adjusting in response to the overall state of the system. And this interval-based progression reflects the same principle seen in other aspects of the body's nighttime activity, where processes are distributed rather than concentrated, allowing them to continue under changing conditions without requiring perfect alignment. And this distribution is especially important in the brain, where maintaining function depends on preserving a delicate balance between activity and stability, and where excessive accumulation or excessive removal could disrupt the system. So instead, the brain regulates this process carefully, allowing gradual change that can be adjusted as needed. And this gradual approach means that the clearing process is never fully complete, because the conditions that drive it continue to change, new byproducts are generated, fluid movement shifts with each phase of sleep, and the overall state of the brain evolves across the night. And when morning approaches, the process does not stop. It transitions, continuing at a different pace during wakefulness, influenced by activity, posture, and circulation. And this continuity shows that the brain does not treat nighttime as a separate window in which all clearing must be finished, but as part of a broader cycle where accumulation and removal are always in motion. And this cycle has roots in early human conditions, where patterns of activity and rest were not rigidly separated, and where the brain needed to maintain function across varying levels of alertness and exposure. And this required a system that could manage internal balance continuously, rather than relying on a single period of completion. And this continuous management is what prevents the resetting process from ever reaching an endpoint, because there is always another adjustment taking place, another movement of fluid, another change in activity that alters the conditions within the brain. And these changes are not isolated, they interact with the processes of memory, coordination, and regulation that are also unfolding, creating a network of ongoing adjustments that cannot be resolved in a single cycle. And this network is what allows the brain to remain functional across time, preserving its ability to adapt while maintaining enough stability to support awareness. And when viewed from this perspective, the nighttime activity of clearing and redistribution is not a task that can be completed, but a process that must continue, shaped by the same principles that guide the rest of the body, where balance is maintained not by finishing, but by adjusting again and again across each phase of the night and into the following day, just as it has done throughout human history, where the brain evolved not to reach a final state of clarity, but but to sustain a flow of activity that never fully settles and never fully ends. As these processes of reorganization and gradual clearing continue through the night, the brain also engages in another form of adjustment that is less about adding or removing and more about recalibrating the strength of its internal connections. And this recalibration reflects a widely accepted understanding that neural activity during sleep does not simply reinforce everything that was experienced during the day, but selectively adjusts patterns of connection, strengthening some while allowing others to weaken. And this selective change is not driven by a single rule. It depends on context, recent activity, and the overall state of the system, which means that the brain is constantly evaluating and modifying its internal structure in ways that are subtle and ongoing. And this modification is not something that can be completed in one cycle, because the inputs that shape it are always changing, and the system itself must remain adaptable, capable of responding to new information without becoming fixed. And this leads to a form of balance where stability is maintained through continuous adjustment rather than through permanent structure. And during the night, this adjustment becomes more visible as patterns of activity shift, allowing the brain to revisit and reshape connections without the constant demands of external input. But even in this state, the process is not isolated. It is influenced by signals that continue to flow from the body, such as changes in internal timing, energy availability, and other physiological conditions, all of which affect how the brain allocates its resources. And because these signals are always in motion, the recalibration of connections remains incomplete, always moving toward a new configuration without fully settling into one. And this ongoing adjustment can be understood as part of a broader principle, that the brain is not designed to store information in a fixed form, but to maintain a flexible structure that can be reshaped over time. And this flexibility has roots in early human environments, where conditions were variable and often uncertain, and where the ability to adapt internal representations was more valuable than the ability to preserve them unchanged. And this historical context helps explain why the brain continues to adjust its connections even when it might seem unnecessary, because the system is built to remain open to change, and this openness prevents the resetting process from reaching completion, since there is always another adjustment that could be made, another pattern that could be refined, another connection that could be strengthened or weakened in response to new conditions. And this does not mean that the brain is unstable. It means that it is actively maintaining its stability through change, allowing it to function across different contexts without becoming rigid. And when morning arrives, this recalibration does not end. It continues in a different form, influenced by new experiences and ongoing activity, carrying forward the adjustments made during the night and integrating them into the next cycle. And this continuity reveals that the resetting process is not confined to sleep, but extends across time, linking nights and days into a continuous sequence of modification. And within this sequence, the brain does not reach a final state. It remains in motion, always adjusting, always recalibrating, and always maintaining a balance that is never fully complete, just as it has done throughout human history, where survival depended not on fixed structures, but on the ability to adapt quietly and continuously without ever coming to a final point of rest. When attention moves away from the brain and returns to the rest of the body, a similar pattern begins to appear in the way muscles behave during the night. Because even when movement is minimal and the body appears completely still, muscle tissue does not simply turn off. It shifts into a different state of regulation, one that balances relaxation with the need to maintain readiness. And this balance can be understood through the concept of muscle tone, which refers to the low level of tension that is always present in muscles, even at rest. And this tone is not constant. It changes throughout the night, influenced by internal signals and by the position of the body. And these changes are not random. They follow patterns that have been observed in widely accepted research on sleep, where different stages are associated with different levels of muscle activity, some allowing deeper relaxation, others maintaining more responsiveness. And this variation reflects the same principle seen in other systems, that the body does not commit fully to a single state, but moves between states that allow different functions to be carried out. And within this movement, muscles are not simply resting, they are adjusting, redistributing tension, and maintaining circulation, all of which contribute to the broader process of resetting. And this adjustment is necessary because the conditions under which early humans rested did not allow for complete physical release. Surfaces were often uneven, temperatures varied, and the need to respond to environmental changes remained present. So the body developed a way of resting that preserved a degree of readiness, even in deeper phases of sleep, and this readiness is still present today, reflected in the way muscles retain a baseline level of activity that can be increased quickly if needed. And this baseline prevents the system from reaching a fully relaxed, final state, because complete relaxation would reduce the ability to respond, and in environments where unpredictability was common, such a state would not have been advantageous. And over time, this led to a structure where muscle activity is continuously modulated, increasing and decreasing in response to internal and external cues, and this modulation is not completed within a single night, because the factors that influence it are always changing, including posture, temperature, and internal timing, and these factors require ongoing adjustment as muscles respond to shifts in pressure, redistribute blood flow, and maintain alignment, and even small movements during sleep, often unnoticed, are part of this process, allowing the body to correct imbalances and prevent prolonged strain, and these corrections are not interruptions to rest. They are part of how rest is maintained, ensuring that no single position or state is held long enough to create instability, and this continuous adjustment reveals that muscle behavior during the night is not about reaching a final point of relaxation, but about maintaining a balance between release and readiness. And this balance is never fully resolved, because the conditions that shape it continue to evolve, both within the body and in relation to the environment, and when viewed in this way, the resetting process extends beyond the brain into the physical structure of the body, where muscles participate in ongoing cycles of adjustment that support both stability and flexibility, and this participation reflects a broader pattern in human biology, one that has been shaped by long periods of adaptation to environments where rest could never be completely separated from the need to remain prepared. And within that pattern, muscles do not simply stop working at night, they continue to adjust, quietly and continuously, contributing to a process that never fully completes, but always moves forward. As the night progresses and the body settles into different positions, the role of muscles becomes even more apparent, not as agents of movement, but as regulators of pressure, circulation, and structural balance. And this regulatory function requires continuous adjustment because the body is never perfectly supported by the surfaces beneath it, even in more controlled environments. And this was especially true in early human settings, where the ground was uneven, materials were inconsistent, and insulation was limited. And under those conditions, the body could not rely on a stable external support, so muscles had to compensate, making small, ongoing corrections to maintain alignment and prevent localized strain. And these corrections are subtle, often occurring without awareness, but they are essential, because without them, pressure would build unevenly across tissues, circulation would be restricted, and discomfort would increase, potentially disrupting the ability to remain at rest. And this reveals that stillness during sleep is not a passive state, it is maintained through active regulation, where muscles engage just enough to support the body while allowing other systems to carry out their processes. And this engagement varies across the night, influenced by changes in posture, shifts in internal timing, and interactions with the environment. And these variations create a pattern of micro-adjustments, where the body makes small shifts in position or tension to redistribute load and maintain balance. And these shifts are not interruptions, they are part of how the system sustains itself, ensuring that no single area remains under constant pressure for too long. And this pattern can be traced back to the adaptive needs of early humans, who often rested on surfaces that required constant adjustment and where the ability to remain in one position without movement would not have been practical or safe. And over time, this led to a system where movement and stillness are not opposites, but integrated, with small movements supporting extended periods of rest. And this integration is still present today, even when the environment is more stable, because the underlying mechanisms continue to operate in the same way, responding to internal cues and maintaining circulation through subtle changes in muscle activity. And these changes are not synchronized across the entire body. They occur in different regions at different times, depending on local conditions, creating a distributed pattern of adjustment that prevents the system from reaching a uniform state of rest. And this distribution is important because it allows the body to manage multiple demands simultaneously, supporting circulation, maintaining alignment, and preserving readiness, all without requiring large movements or full engagement. And as a result, the resetting process remains incomplete, not because it is interrupted, but because it is designed to continue, adapting to the shifting conditions within and around the body. And this ongoing adjustment reflects a broader principle in human biology, that stability is achieved through continuous change, not through fixed positions. And within this principle, muscles play a central role, not by becoming inactive, but by modulating their activity in response to need. And this modulation does not end when the night ends. It continues into the day, where posture, movement, and environment introduce new variables that require further adjustment. And in this way, the behavior of muscles during the night becomes part of a larger cycle, one that extends across time, linking periods of rest and activity into a continuous process of regulation, where no single moment represents completion, and every adjustment leads into the next, just as it has throughout human history, where the body learned to maintain itself not by stopping, but by adapting, quietly and continuously, without ever reaching a final state of rest. As these subtle adjustments continue through the night, the muscles also participate in a broader coordination with other systems that are regulating circulation and energy use. And this coordination adds another layer to the idea that physical rest is never complete, because muscles are not only responding to pressure and posture, they are also involved in supporting the movement of blood and fluids throughout the body. And this support is necessary because circulation does not operate independently of muscle activity, even during sleep. Small changes in tension and position can influence how efficiently blood flows, how fluids are redistributed, and how tissues receive the resources they need to maintain function. And this interaction means that muscles remain part of a larger system of regulation, contributing to processes that extend beyond their immediate role. And this contribution requires them to remain partially active, adjusting in response to internal signals that reflect changing conditions, such as shifts in temperature, variations in metabolic activity, and the ongoing demands of maintaining balance. And these signals do not follow a simple pattern. They fluctuate throughout the night, creating a need for continuous adjustment rather than a single, complete release. And this continuous adjustment reflects a principle that has been present since early human environments, where the body had to maintain function across changing conditions without relying on external support. And under those conditions, the coordination between muscles and circulation would have been essential, allowing the body to manage temperature, distribute energy, and remain responsive even while resting. And this coordination is still present today, embedded in the way muscles and other systems interact, creating a network of activity that persists through the night and into the day. And within this network, no single system completes its work independently, because each adjustment influences others, and each system must remain flexible enough to respond to changes that originate elsewhere. And this interdependence prevents the body from reaching a final state of rest, because there is always another interaction taking place, another adjustment required to maintain balance across the system as a whole. And this becomes especially clear when we consider that even in deeper phases of sleep, where muscle activity is reduced, it is not eliminated entirely. Certain functions are maintained, and the body preserves a level of readiness that allows it to respond if needed. And this readiness is not a separate feature. It is integrated into the structure of sleep itself, reflecting a long history of adaptation to environments where complete disengagement would not have been advantageous. And over time, this has led to a form of rest that is inherently dynamic, where muscles participate in ongoing cycles of adjustment that support both internal regulation and external responsiveness. And these cycles do not resolve into a final state, because the conditions that shape them continue to evolve, influenced by both internal processes and environmental context. And when viewed in this way, the behavior of muscles during the night reinforces a broader pattern in the body, where resetting is not about reaching a point of completion, but about sustaining a process of continuous adjustment, one that allows the system to remain functional across changing conditions. And this process does not end with the night. It continues into the day, where new demands introduce new variables, and the cycle of adjustment begins again, not from a state of completion, but from a state of ongoing balance, just as it has throughout human history, where the body learned to maintain itself through movement, interaction, and constant recalibration, rather than through stillness or final resolution. When attention shifts from muscles and structure to the flow of energy within the body, another pattern emerges that further explains why the process of resetting never fully completes. Because energy is not stored and released in a fixed or perfectly balanced way, it moves continuously, shaped by intake, use, and redistribution. And even during the night, when activity appears minimal, the body is still consuming energy to maintain essential functions, including circulation, temperature regulation, and the ongoing work of internal systems. And this consumption does not pause, it adjusts, decreasing in some areas while remaining steady, or even increasing in others. And this uneven distribution reflects a broader principle. That energy balance in the body is not a stable point, but a shifting range that is constantly recalibrated in response to changing conditions. And this recalibration has roots in early human environments, where access to food was not guaranteed and energy had to be managed carefully across periods of scarcity and abundance. And under those conditions, the body evolved to use energy flexibly, storing it when available and releasing it gradually when needed. And this flexibility required a system that could adjust continuously, rather than relying on a fixed cycle of depletion and restoration. And during the night, this adjustment becomes more visible, as the body redistributes energy toward processes that are less prominent during the day, such as internal organization and maintenance, while still preserving enough capacity to respond if necessary. And this redistribution is not precise. It is influenced by recent activity, current reserves, and internal signals that reflect the state of the organism. And because these factors are always changing, the balance between energy use and restoration is never fully achieved. There is always a difference between what has been used and what has been restored. And this difference does not represent a failure. It represents a system that is designed to operate within variation, maintaining function even when conditions are not ideal. And this design prevents the resetting process from reaching completion because energy balance is always being adjusted, never finalized, and this can be observed in the way the body responds to different patterns of activity, where periods of higher demand are followed by gradual adjustments that extend beyond a single night. And this extension shows that energy regulation is not confined to discrete cycles, but unfolds across time, integrating past and present conditions into a continuous process. And this process is influenced not only by internal needs, but also by external factors such as temperature and light, which can affect how energy is used and conserved, further adding to the variability that the system must manage. And within this variability, the body does not aim to reach a perfect balance. It aims to remain within a range that supports function, adjusting as needed to stay within that range. And this ongoing adjustment is what defines the resetting process in relation to energy, not as a task that can be completed, but as a function that must continue, shaped by the same conditions that have influenced human biology since its earliest stages, where survival depended on the ability to manage energy across uncertain conditions. And within that context, the body did not evolve to finish its work at night, but to carry it forward, redistributing resources in ways that support both immediate needs and future demands. And in doing so, it maintains a balance that is always in motion, never fully settled, and never fully complete. As this movement of energy continues through the night, the body does not treat energy as a single pool that can be fully restored and then left unchanged, but as a set of interconnected reserves that are constantly being adjusted, because different tissues and systems draw from and contribute to energy in different ways. And these differences create a pattern where some areas are replenishing while others are still using or redistributing. And this uneven activity prevents the system from reaching a uniform state of balance, since there is always some part of the body that is still in transition, and this can be understood through widely accepted knowledge about how the body stores and uses energy, where short-term reserves are used for immediate needs, while longer-term reserves are mobilized more gradually, and these processes overlap rather than occur in sequence, meaning that the body is always both using and restoring energy at the same time. And during the night, this overlap becomes more apparent because the absence of large movements does not eliminate energy demand, it shifts it, allowing certain processes to become more prominent while others continue at a lower level. and this shift reflects conditions that were present in early human environments, where energy use could not be confined to periods of activity, since maintaining body temperature, responding to environmental changes, and supporting internal regulation all required continuous input. And under those conditions, the body developed a system that distributes energy across multiple functions without requiring a complete reset between cycles. And this distribution is still present today, influencing how the body manages energy during rest. And this management is not exact. It involves small imbalances that are corrected over time, rather than eliminated in a single period. And these corrections depend on signals that are constantly changing, including internal timing, environmental conditions, and the recent history of the organism. And because these signals are never static, the adjustments they drive are also ongoing, preventing the system from settling into a final state. And this becomes especially clear when we consider that the body continues to prepare for future demands. Even while it is addressing current needs, allocating resources in ways that reflect both immediate conditions and anticipated activity. And this forward-looking aspect of energy regulation adds another layer to the resetting process, because it means that the body is not only restoring what has been used, but also shaping what will be available. And this shaping cannot be completed in a single cycle, since future conditions are not fully known, and the system must remain flexible, capable of adjusting its allocation as new information becomes available. And this flexibility is what allows the body to function across a wide range of conditions. But it also ensures that energy balance is never fully achieved, because there is always another adjustment to be made, another redistribution to consider, another signal to integrate. And within this continuous movement, the idea of a complete reset becomes less relevant, because the system is not designed to return to a fixed point, but to maintain a dynamic balance that evolves over time. And this evolution reflects a long history of adaptation to environments where energy availability was uncertain, and where survival depended on the ability to manage resources continuously, rather than in isolated cycles. And in that sense, the body does not finish restoring energy at night. It continues to adjust it, quietly and persistently, across each phase of the night and into the following day, maintaining a flow that never fully stops and never fully resolves. As this continuous redistribution of energy extends across the night and into the following day, another layer of complexity appears, one that shows how the body does not simply respond to current energy levels, but also to patterns that unfold over longer periods of time. And this means that energy regulation is influenced not only by what has just occurred, but by accumulated effects from previous days, where periods of higher demand or reduced intake leave traces that shape how the body allocates its resources in the present. And these traces are not fixed, they are gradually adjusted, but they do not disappear within a single cycle. And this persistence prevents the system from reaching a point where all energy stores are fully aligned with immediate needs, because there is always some influence from prior states that continues to affect the balance. And this influence reflects conditions that were common in early human environments, where energy availability could fluctuate across days or even longer periods, requiring the body to manage resources in a way that extended beyond a single night. And under those conditions, it would not have been practical to expect complete restoration within one cycle. So the body developed mechanisms that allow for gradual adjustment across time, smoothing out differences rather than eliminating them entirely. And this smoothing process is still present today, influencing how the body responds to variations in activity and intake. And this response is not immediate. It unfolds over multiple cycles, with each night contributing to a broader pattern of regulation, and this pattern does not converge to a fixed point, because the inputs that shape it continue to change, influenced by ongoing activity, environmental conditions, and internal timing, all of which introduce new variables that must be integrated. And this integration requires continuous adjustment, as the body recalibrates its energy distribution in response to both past and present conditions. And this recalibration is not synchronized across all systems. Some adjust more quickly, others more slowly, creating temporary differences that must be managed over time. And these differences prevent the system from reaching a uniform state, because there is always some part of the body that is still adapting to previous conditions while others are responding to current ones. And this layered timing reveals that energy balance is not a momentary achievement, but an ongoing process that spans multiple cycles. And within this process, the idea of a complete reset becomes less meaningful because the system is always in transition, always integrating new information, and always adjusting its internal state in response to changing conditions. And this ongoing adjustment is what allows the body to remain functional across variability, preserving enough stability to support activity while remaining flexible enough to adapt to future demands. And when viewed in this way, the resetting process in relation to energy is not something that can be finished, but something that must continue, shaped by the same principles that have guided human biology since its earliest stages, where survival depended on managing resources across uncertain conditions. And within that context, the body did not evolve to complete its adjustments at night, but to extend them, carrying forward small changes that accumulate over time, forming a pattern of regulation that never fully settles and never fully ends, but continues quietly, linking nights and days into a continuous flow of energy management that is always in motion and always incomplete. When attention turns to the surrounding environment once again, but now through the lens of how it directly interacts with the body's internal regulation, temperature begins to emerge as one of the most constant yet variable forces shaping the nightly reset. Because unlike light, which follows a more predictable cycle, temperature can shift in ways that are gradual, uneven, and influenced by many factors, and these shifts require the body to remain actively engaged in maintaining internal stability, even during rest. And this engagement is not a single adjustment, but a continuous process of regulation where the body balances heat production and heat loss in response to both internal signals and external conditions. And this balance is not fixed. It changes throughout the night, influenced by the natural drop in ambient temperature that typically occurs after sunset, as well as by the body's own internal timing, which adjusts its preferred temperature range as part of the broader rhythm of sleep. And this adjustment is widely recognized in accepted physiology, where the body lowers its internal temperature slightly as it prepares for sleep. And this lowering is not a final state. It is part of a transition that continues across the night, interacting with other processes that depend on temperature, such as circulation and metabolic activity. And because temperature affects so many systems, any change in it requires multiple responses, creating a network of adjustments that cannot be completed all at once. And this network reflects conditions that were present throughout early human history, where night often brought cooler temperatures that could vary depending on geography, season, and immediate surroundings. And in those environments, the body could not rely on stable external warmth, so it developed mechanisms to conserve heat when needed and release it when possible. And these mechanisms involve changes in blood flow, shifts in posture, and subtle adjustments in muscle activity, all of which contribute to maintaining internal balance. And these adjustments are not isolated. They interact with the processes of sleep and energy regulation already in motion, creating a layered system where temperature becomes both a signal and a constraint, guiding the timing of internal changes while also requiring continuous correction. And this dual role prevents the resetting process from reaching completion, because as long as temperature continues to fluctuate, even slightly, the body must continue to adjust. And this adjustment does not stop when external conditions become more stable, because the internal timing system continues to modulate temperature as part of its cycle, lowering and raising it in patterns that support different phases of sleep and wakefulness. And this ongoing modulation means that temperature is never held at a single point, but moves within a range that is constantly being recalibrated. And within this movement, the body cannot settle into a final state, because each adjustment leads to another, as changes in temperature influence circulation, which in turn affects energy use, which then feeds back into the regulation of temperature itself. And this interconnected loop ensures that the resetting process remains active, shaped by the same principles that have governed human biology since its earliest stages, where survival depended on the ability to maintain internal stability in the face of changing environmental conditions. And within that context, temperature was never constant, and neither was the body's response to it. And this legacy continues today, where even in controlled environments, the body maintains its patterns of adjustment, responding to subtle variations and internal signals that keep the system in motion. And in doing so, it reveals that the nightly reset is not a closed process, but an open one, continuously influenced by temperature and the environment, never fully resolved, and always continuing. As these shifts in temperature continue to shape the body through the night, the surrounding environment reveals itself not as a background, but as an active system that the body must constantly negotiate with. Because temperature is never experienced in isolation, it is always carried through air, held by surfaces, and altered by the smallest movements, and each of these elements introduces variation that the body cannot ignore, even when the differences seem subtle. And this becomes especially important when we consider that the human body does not measure temperature in absolute terms, but through gradients and changes, detecting differences across the skin and adjusting accordingly. And this sensitivity means that even minor variations in airflow or surface contact can trigger internal responses, leading to small but continuous adjustments in circulation and posture. And these adjustments are not optional. They are necessary to maintain a workable internal state, because heat is constantly being exchanged between the body and its surroundings, and this exchange does not pause during sleep. It continues as long as the body exists within an environment, and in early human conditions, this exchange would have been even more pronounced, as natural settings rarely provided consistent insulation, and surfaces such as soil, stone, or plant material would absorb and release heat at different rates, creating uneven patterns that the body had to adapt to. And this adaptation did not involve eliminating variation, but working within it, using small shifts in position and internal regulation to maintain balance. And over time, this led to a system where rest is inseparable from adjustment, because the body cannot remain in a single thermal state without responding to its surroundings. And this responsiveness is still present today, even when modern materials create a more stable environment. Because the underlying mechanisms have not changed, they continue to operate as if variation is expected, adjusting blood flow to different regions, altering skin temperature, and redistributing heat in response to both internal rhythms and external conditions. And these adjustments do not occur uniformly across the body. They happen in localized patterns, where some areas release heat while others conserve it, depending on their exposure and role. And this creates a layered response that cannot resolve into a single, stable condition, because each local adjustment influences the system as a whole, requiring further corrections elsewhere. And this chain of adjustments continues throughout the night, shaped by changes that may be too small to notice consciously, but are significant enough to require response. And this continuous interaction reveals that temperature regulation is not a passive background process, but an active component of the body's nightly activity, influencing how other systems operate and when certain processes can proceed. And because these influences are always changing, the resetting process cannot reach completion. There is always another adjustment required, another fluctuation to integrate, another shift in balance to manage, and this ongoing need for correction reflects a deeper pattern that has existed since early human history, where the environment was never static, and where the body could not rely on fixed conditions to support rest, and instead it developed a way of functioning that embraces variability, maintaining stability through continuous change rather than through fixed states. And within this pattern, the idea of a complete reset becomes less relevant, because the system is not designed to finish its work under stable conditions. It is designed to continue its work under changing ones, and this design ensures that the process remains open, always adjusting, always responding, and always carrying forward into the next moment, just as it has done across generations, where each night was shaped by a different combination of factors, and where the body learned not to wait for perfect conditions, but to adapt to whatever conditions were present, maintaining a balance that is never fully settled and never fully complete. As these environmental influences continue to shape the body through the night, another detail becomes clearer. The body is not only responding to temperature as it changes, but is also adjusting in anticipation of those changes, guided by internal timing that reflects repeated exposure to similar patterns across many cycles. And this anticipation does not eliminate the need for adjustment. It shifts it forward, allowing the body to prepare for cooling or warming before it fully occurs. And this preparation is gradual, involving changes in circulation, subtle shifts in posture, and adjustments in how heat is distributed across different regions. And these changes are not synchronized perfectly with the environment, because external conditions are never completely predictable, and this lack of perfect alignment creates a constant need for correction as the body refines its response in real time, and this refinement is not a single process, it is layered, with some adjustments occurring quickly and others unfolding more slowly, depending on the systems involved. And this layering reflects a broader principle in human biology, that the body operates through overlapping responses rather than isolated actions, and within this structure, no single adjustment resolves the system, because each change influences others, requiring further modification, and this interconnected response becomes especially important when we consider that temperature affects not only comfort, but also the timing of other processes, including shifts in alertness and the transitions between different phases of sleep. And because these processes are linked, any variation in temperature can alter their timing, leading to further adjustments that extend beyond thermal regulation itself. And this creates a network of interactions where environmental changes ripple through the body, influencing multiple systems at once, and this ripple effect prevents the resetting process from reaching a final state, because there is always another layer of response unfolding, another interaction in progress, another adjustment being made, and this pattern can be traced back to early human environments, where nights were shaped by gradual cooling, occasional fluctuations, and varying levels of exposure, and under those conditions, the body could not rely on a fixed response. It had to remain flexible, capable of adjusting continuously as conditions evolved, and over time, this flexibility became embedded in the structure of sleep, where rest is organized around the ability to respond rather than the ability to complete. And this organization persists today, even in environments that are more controlled, because the internal systems continue to operate according to the same principles, anticipating change, responding to variation, and maintaining balance through ongoing adjustment. And this ongoing adjustment is what defines the relationship between the body and its environment during the night, not as a problem to be solved, but as a condition to be managed. And within this condition, the resetting process does not conclude, it continues, shaped by both expectation and response, always moving between preparation and correction, and never settling into a final state. And this continuous movement reflects a deeper pattern that has guided human biology across time, where survival depended not on achieving stability, but on maintaining adaptability. And within that pattern, the body learned to operate in cycles that do not close, carrying forward adjustments from one moment to the next, integrating past and present into a flow that never fully resolves. And in that flow, the nightly reset reveals its true nature, not as an endpoint, but as an ongoing process that continues quietly, shaped by the environment and never fully complete. When attention shifts toward memory, the idea of resetting becomes even more subtle, because memory is often imagined as something that is stored and preserved, but widely accepted research shows that it is instead a process that is continuously reorganized, especially during sleep. And this reorganization does not simply reinforce what has already been experienced. It adjusts how those experiences are integrated with what already exists, shaping patterns that will influence future perception and behavior. And this shaping is not completed in a single moment. It unfolds gradually across different phases of sleep, where patterns of neural activity revisit recent experiences in ways that are selective rather than uniform. And this selectivity means that some elements are strengthened while others are reduced or reorganized. And this process depends on context, relevance, and the overall state of the system, rather than on a fixed rule. And because these factors are always changing, the process of memory adjustment cannot reach a final state. There is always another layer of integration that remains in progress, and this ongoing adjustment reflects conditions that have been present throughout human history, where the environment was complex and often uncertain, and where the ability to update internal representations over time was more valuable than preserving them unchanged. And under those conditions, memory could not function as a static record. It had to remain flexible, capable of incorporating new information while refining what was already known. And this flexibility is still present today, shaping how the brain organizes information during sleep, not by storing it permanently, but by integrating it into a system that is always evolving. And this integration involves interactions between different regions of the brain, where signals are exchanged and patterns are coordinated in ways that support both stability and adaptability. And these interactions are not isolated. They are influenced by other processes that are occurring at the same time, including changes in energy use, internal timing, and physiological state, all of which affect how the brain allocates its resources. And because these influences are always in motion, the process of memory organization remains incomplete, always moving toward a new configuration without fully settling into one. And this can be observed in how memories can change over time, not because they are replaced, but because they are continuously adjusted in relation to new experiences and ongoing activity. And this adjustment does not stop when sleep ends. It continues into the day, where new inputs further reshape the system, creating a continuous cycle where memory is never fixed, but always in transition. And within this cycle, the idea of a complete reset becomes less meaningful, because the brain is not returning to an original state. It is maintaining a process of change that allows it to remain functional across varying conditions. And this process is shaped by the same principles that have guided human adaptation since its earliest stages, where survival depended on the ability to interpret and respond to a changing world. And within that context, memory was not something to be finished, but something to be maintained, adjusted, and carried forward. And in that ongoing adjustment, the resetting process reveals itself, not as a final correction, but as a continuous reorganization that never fully ends and never fully begins again, but remains in motion across each night and into each day, quietly shaping how the body and mind continue to function. As this reorganization of memory continues through the night, it becomes clearer that the brain is not simply deciding what to keep and what to discard, but is adjusting how different pieces of information relate to one another, forming patterns that are more efficient for future use. And this adjustment is not uniform. It depends on how recent experiences connect with existing knowledge, how often they are revisited, and how relevant they are to the overall state of the organism. And because these factors are always shifting, the structure of memory is never fixed. It is continuously reshaped. And this reshaping is guided by patterns of activity that revisit fragments of experience, not in their original form, but in ways that allow them to be integrated into broader networks. And this integration does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually, across multiple cycles of sleep, where different phases contribute in different ways. And this gradual process reflects a principle that has been observed across many biological systems, that complex adjustments are distributed over time rather than completed in a single interval. And this distribution allows the brain to remain flexible, capable of incorporating new information without disrupting existing structures, but it also ensures that the process never fully completes, because there is always another connection to refine, another relationship to adjust, another pattern to integrate. And this ongoing activity can be understood more clearly when we consider that memory is not only about the past, it is also about preparing for the future, shaping expectations and guiding behavior in ways that depend on how information is organized. And this forward-looking aspect means that the brain is constantly updating its internal models, even during sleep, adjusting them in response to both recent experience and accumulated history. And this adjustment is influenced by internal conditions, such as energy availability and physiological state, as well as by external factors that have been encoded during the day. And because these influences are never static, the process of memory organization remains open, always moving toward a new configuration without settling into a final one. And this openness reflects conditions that have existed throughout human history, where environments were variable and often unpredictable, requiring a system that could adapt continuously, rather than one that relied on fixed representations. And over time, this need for adaptability became embedded in the way memory functions, creating a structure that is inherently dynamic, where stability is maintained through ongoing adjustment rather than through permanence. And this dynamic structure prevents the resetting process from reaching completion because there is always another layer of refinement in progress, another adjustment that could improve how information is organized, another shift that could better align internal models with external conditions. And this continuous refinement does not end when the night ends. It carries forward into the day, where new experiences further shape the system, creating a loop where memory is constantly being reorganized in response to changing conditions. And within this loop, the idea of a complete reset becomes less relevant, because the brain is not designed to return to a fixed state. It is designed to maintain a process of adjustment that allows it to remain functional across time, and in that process, memory is not something that is finished. It is something that is continuously shaped, quietly and persistently, across each cycle, never fully complete and never fully at rest. As this ongoing reorganization continues across nights, another aspect of memory becomes more visible, one that reveals how the brain is not only adjusting individual experiences, but is also balancing between stability and change at a broader level. And this balance is necessary because the system must preserve enough continuity to function while remaining flexible enough to adapt. And this dual requirement means that memory cannot be fully reset or finalized, because doing so would either erase useful patterns or make the system too rigid to respond to new information. And instead, the brain maintains a structure where past experiences are continuously reshaped in relation to present conditions, allowing older patterns to be retained in a modified form while new ones are integrated. And this integration does not occur in isolation. It is influenced by emotional relevance, repetition, and context, all of which shape how strongly different elements are represented. And because these influences change over time, the structure of memory remains in motion, always being recalibrated. And this recalibration is not confined to a single night. It unfolds across multiple cycles, where each period of sleep contributes small adjustments that accumulate gradually. And this accumulation reflects a principle that has been present throughout human evolution, where environments were not stable, and where learning required continuous updating rather than fixed storage. And under those conditions, a system that could adapt over time would have been more effective than one that aimed for completion. And this adaptability is still evident today in the way memories can shift in emphasis or detail as new experiences are added, not because they are replaced, but because they are integrated into a broader network that is always evolving. And this network does not settle into a final configuration, because it is constantly being influenced by new inputs and ongoing processes, and this influence extends beyond conscious experience, involving patterns of neural activity that continue to adjust even when attention is directed elsewhere. And this continuous activity ensures that the process of memory organization remains open, always capable of further refinement, and this openness prevents the resetting process from reaching an endpoint, because there is always another adjustment that could improve alignment between internal representations and external conditions. And this does not mean that the system is unstable. It means that stability is maintained through change, through the ability to adjust without losing coherence. And this form of stability is what allows the brain to function across time, preserving continuity while remaining adaptable. And when viewed in this way, memory becomes part of the broader pattern of the body's nightly activity, not as something that is restored to a fixed state, but as something that is continuously reshaped, linking past and present into a flow that never fully resolves. And this flow extends beyond the boundaries of sleep, continuing into the day, where new experiences further influence the system, creating a continuous loop of adjustment that reflects the same principles that have guided human adaptation since its earliest stages, where survival depended on the ability to learn and adapt without ever reaching a final, unchanging state. And within that context, the idea of a complete reset becomes less meaningful because the system is designed not to finish its work, but to keep it in motion, quietly and continuously, across each cycle and across time itself. When attention turns to the role of hormones in the body's nightly activity, another layer of continuous adjustment becomes visible, because hormonal signals do not operate as fixed instructions, but as fluctuating patterns that rise and fall over time, guiding processes without ever bringing them to a final state. And these fluctuations are not random, they follow rhythms that are influenced by internal timing systems, as well as by external conditions. And among these, the daily cycle of light and darkness plays a central role, shaping how certain hormones increase or decrease at different points across the night. And this pattern has been widely studied, showing that some signals associated with alertness gradually decline as night begins, while others associated with rest increase. But this shift is not abrupt. It unfolds slowly, and even as one set of signals rises, others do not disappear completely. They continue at lower levels, creating an overlap that prevents the system from settling into a single, uniform state. And this overlap reflects a broader principle that hormonal regulation is based on balance rather than replacement, where multiple signals interact to produce a coordinated response. And this coordination is not static, it requires continuous adjustment, because the levels of these signals are influenced by many factors, including prior activity, environmental conditions, and internal feedback from other systems. And these influences ensure that hormonal patterns are always in motion, never fixed, and this movement is especially important during the night, where the body transitions through different phases that are guided in part by these signals. And because these phases require different conditions, hormonal levels must adjust accordingly, rising or falling in patterns that support each stage. And this adjustment does not reach completion within a single night, because the signals themselves are part of longer cycles that extend across multiple days, influenced by ongoing patterns of activity and rest. And this extension reflects conditions that have existed throughout human history, where daily rhythms were shaped by natural cycles but also influenced by variability in environment and behavior. And under those conditions, the body could not rely on perfectly consistent signals, so it developed a system that remains flexible, capable of adjusting hormonal patterns in response to changing inputs. And this flexibility ensures that the resetting process cannot come to an end, because the signals that guide it are always being recalibrated, always responding to new conditions, and always interacting with other systems that are also in motion. And this interaction creates a network of ongoing adjustments, where no single signal determines the outcome, and no single phase completes the process. And instead, the body moves through a sequence of states that are coordinated but never finalized. And when morning approaches, these hormonal patterns begin to shift again, preparing the body for wakefulness. But this shift does not erase what has occurred during the night. It builds upon it, carrying forward adjustments into the next phase. And this continuity reveals that hormonal regulation is not a cycle that closes, but one that continues, linking nights and days into a flow of activity that never fully settles. And within this flow, the resetting process is not something that can be completed, but something that must remain active, guided by signals that are always changing, always interacting, and always shaping the body's internal state in ways that are subtle, continuous, and never fully resolved. As these hormonal patterns continue to rise and fall through the night, it becomes clearer that the body is not guided by a single dominant signal at any given moment, but by the interaction of many signals that overlap in time, each one influencing the others in ways that are gradual rather than immediate. And this overlap creates a system where transitions are never clean or final, because as one set of signals increases, another is already beginning to change, and this layered movement prevents the body from settling into a fixed state, since there is always some degree of adjustment still unfolding. And this can be observed in widely accepted knowledge about how different hormones fluctuate across the night, where signals associated with rest, recovery, and alertness do not operate in isolation, but are coordinated through feedback loops that allow them to respond to both internal conditions and external cues. And these feedback loops are not perfectly synchronized. They operate on slightly different timelines, creating a pattern where the body is always negotiating between signals that are close but not identical. And this negotiation requires continuous recalibration, as the system adjusts to maintain a workable balance. And this balance is not a point of completion. It is a moving range that shifts in response to changing conditions. And these conditions include not only the immediate environment, but also the recent history of the organism, such as patterns of activity, exposure to light, and variations in rest, all of which influence how hormonal signals are expressed. And because these influences are always changing, the hormonal system cannot reach a final state. It remains in motion, constantly adjusting its levels and interactions. And this ongoing adjustment reflects conditions that were present throughout early human history, where daily life was shaped by variability rather than consistency, and where the body needed to remain flexible in its responses, capable of adjusting its internal signals to match changing circumstances. And over time, this flexibility became embedded in the structure of hormonal regulation, creating a system that is designed to adapt continuously rather than to stabilize completely. And this design is what prevents the resetting process from ever being finished. because the signals that guide it are themselves part of a dynamic network, always interacting, always shifting, and always influencing one another. And this interaction extends beyond the night, continuing into the day, where new inputs further alter the balance, leading to additional adjustments that carry forward into the next cycle. And within this continuous flow, the idea of a complete reset becomes less meaningful because the system is not returning to a baseline. It is maintaining a pattern of change that allows it to function across varying conditions. And this pattern has been shaped by the same principles that have guided human biology since its earliest stages, where survival depended on the ability to respond to change rather than to achieve stability. And within that context, hormonal signals were not meant to settle into a final configuration, but to remain responsive, guiding the body through transitions that never fully resolve. And in doing so, they contribute to a process of resetting that is not defined by completion, but by continuity, moving forward through each phase without ever reaching an endpoint. As these overlapping hormonal patterns continue to guide the body across the night and into the following day, another detail becomes more apparent. The system is not only reacting to current conditions, but is also shaped by signals that extend across longer periods, creating layers of influence that do not align perfectly within a single cycle. And this layering means that the body is always balancing between signals that reflect immediate needs and those that carry the effects of previous days. And this balance cannot be resolved completely because the conditions that shape it are always evolving. And this can be understood through the way hormonal rhythms extend beyond a single night, influenced by repeated patterns of activity, rest, and environmental exposure, all of which leave traces that affect how signals rise and fall in the present. And these traces are not fixed, they are gradually adjusted, but they do not disappear entirely, and their persistence creates a system where the body is always integrating past and present signals at the same time. And this integration requires continuous recalibration, as the system adjusts to maintain a workable balance across different timescales, and this recalibration is not synchronized across all signals. Some respond more quickly to changes, others more slowly, creating temporary differences that must be managed over time, and these differences prevent the system from reaching a uniform state because there is always some part of the hormonal network that is still adapting while others have already shifted. And this asynchrony reflects conditions that were present throughout early human history, where daily cycles were influenced by longer-term patterns such as seasonal variation, resource availability, and changes in activity. And under those conditions, the body could not rely on a single, consistent rhythm. It had to manage multiple rhythms at once, adjusting them gradually in response to changing inputs. And over time, this led to a system where hormonal regulation operates across layers, with short-term fluctuations interacting with longer-term trends. And this interaction ensures that the resetting process cannot be confined to a single night, because the signals that guide it extend beyond that time frame, carrying forward adjustments that unfold over multiple cycles. And this extension can be observed in how the body responds to changes in routine, where shifts in timing or behavior do not produce immediate alignment, but require gradual adjustment over several days. And during this period, the system remains in motion, recalibrating its signals in response to both new conditions and residual patterns from the past. And this ongoing recalibration prevents the body from reaching a final state, because there is always another layer of adjustment still in progress. Another interaction between signals that must be integrated, another shift that must be accommodated, and this continuous integration is what allows the body to maintain coherence across changing conditions, preserving enough stability to function while remaining flexible enough to adapt. And when viewed in this way, hormonal regulation becomes part of a broader pattern that defines the body's nightly activity, not as a process that begins and ends within fixed boundaries, but as one that extends across time, linking nights and days into a continuous flow of adjustment. And within this flow, the idea of a complete reset becomes less relevant, because the system is not designed to return to a fixed baseline. It is designed to remain responsive, always adjusting, always integrating, and always carrying forward into the next cycle, just as it has done throughout human history, where survival depended not on achieving stability, but on sustaining a process of continuous change. And in that process, the resetting of the body reveals itself not as an endpoint, but but as an ongoing condition that never fully resolves and never fully ends. When the focus moves from daily cycles to the longer arc of time across a human life, the process of resetting begins to reveal another dimension, one that is shaped not only by nightly activity, but by gradual changes that accumulate over years. And this is where the idea of aging becomes closely connected to the body's ability to maintain balance. Because aging does not occur as a sudden shift, it unfolds slowly, through small variations in how systems adjust, recover, and coordinate with one another. And these variations do not stop the resetting process, but they influence how effectively it can operate. And this influence can be understood through widely accepted observations that many regulatory systems become less precise over time, not in a way that halts their function, but in a way that introduces more variability into their responses. And this variability means that the body is still adjusting, but the adjustments may take longer, may be less synchronized, or may not align as closely with internal or external signals. And this gradual change does not represent a failure of the system. It reflects the cumulative effects of continuous activity across many cycles, where small differences build over time, shaping how the body responds in the present. And this accumulation has roots in the same principles that have guided human biology from its earliest stages, where the body has always operated within changing conditions, and where the ability to maintain function over time depends on continuous adjustment rather than on perfect restoration. And as these adjustments accumulate, the system begins to show signs of drift, where the balance that once could be maintained more easily now requires more effort. And this drift does not eliminate the resetting process. It makes it more complex, because the body must now manage both current conditions and the accumulated effects of prior cycles, and this dual demand prevents the system from reaching a final state, because there is always another layer of adjustment required, another interaction to manage, another signal to integrate, and this becomes especially noticeable in how different systems may change at different rates, creating a situation where coordination becomes more challenging, and where the timing of adjustments may no longer align as closely as before. And this misalignment does not stop the process, but it changes its character, making it more variable and less predictable. And this variability reflects a broader pattern that has been present throughout human history, where the body has always needed to adapt across time, not only within a single night, but across the span of life. And within this span, the resetting process remains active, continuing to adjust, recalibrate, and maintain function, even as the conditions that shape it become more complex. And this continuity shows that aging is not a transition from activity to inactivity, but a shift in how activity is organized, where the same processes continue, but under different constraints. And this shift reinforces the idea that the body is never moving toward a final, completed state, because even as it changes, it remains engaged in the same pattern of continuous adjustment, carrying forward its work across time. And when viewed in this way, aging becomes part of the larger story of the body's nightly activity, not as something separate, but as an extension of the same principle, that balance is not achieved once, but maintained through ongoing change. And within that change, the resetting process does not end, it evolves, adapting to new conditions while continuing to operate, quietly and continuously, without ever reaching a point of completion. As these gradual changes continue across the lifespan, another aspect of the body's regulation becomes more visible, one that shows how the timing and coordination of internal processes begin to shift in subtle ways, not disappearing, but becoming less tightly aligned. And this shift affects how different systems interact with one another, because when timing becomes more variable, the overlap between processes changes, creating patterns where adjustments that once occurred together now unfold at slightly different moments. And this difference does not stop the resetting process, but it alters how it is experienced, making it feel less complete or less consistent, even though the underlying mechanisms remain active. And this can be understood through widely accepted observations that internal rhythms, including those that guide sleep and hormonal patterns, may become less stable over time, showing greater variation in how they rise and fall. And this variation introduces a form of drift, where the body is still following its internal timing, but with less precision. And this reduced precision requires additional adjustment, because the system must now compensate for differences that did not previously exist. and this compensation becomes part of the resetting process itself, adding another layer of activity that extends across the night and into the day. And this layering reflects a broader principle in biology, that systems do not simply degrade, they reorganize, maintaining function through alternative patterns of coordination. And this reorganization is shaped by the same conditions that have influenced human biology throughout history, where environments were variable and required continuous adaptation. And under those conditions, the body developed the ability to function even when alignment was not perfect, relying on flexibility rather than exact synchronization. And this flexibility is what allows the resetting process to continue even as timing becomes less precise. Because the system does not depend on perfect coordination to operate, it works within a range of acceptable variation, adjusting as needed to maintain balance. And this adjustment is ongoing because the sources of variation are always present, influenced by internal changes, environmental conditions, and accumulated effects from prior cycles. And these influences ensure that the process cannot reach a final state. There is always another difference to correct, another signal to integrate, another shift to accommodate. And this becomes especially noticeable when we consider how different parts of the body may respond differently over time, creating patterns where some systems adjust more quickly while others lag behind. And this asynchrony requires continuous recalibration, as the body works to maintain coherence across its systems. And this work does not end. It continues across each cycle, shaped by the same principles that have guided human adaptation across generations, where survival depended not on maintaining perfect alignment, but on sustaining function through variability. And within that context, the resetting process is not diminished by change, it is transformed, becoming more complex, more layered, and more dependent on ongoing adjustment. And in that transformation, the idea of a complete reset becomes even less applicable, because the system is not moving toward a fixed endpoint, it is adapting to a changing set of conditions, maintaining balance through continuous recalibration. And this recalibration extends across nights and days, linking them into a flow that never fully resolves. And within that flow, the body continues its work, quietly adjusting, never fully finishing, and never fully stopping. As these shifts in timing and coordination continue across the lifespan, another pattern begins to emerge, one that shows how the body does not simply become less capable of resetting, but becomes more dependent on the continuity of that process. Because as systems change, the need for ongoing adjustment becomes more central to maintaining function, and this creates a situation where the body relies not on achieving a stable state, but on sustaining the ability to recalibrate, even when that recalibration is less precise than before. And this dependence can be understood through the way multiple systems interact over time, where changes in one area influence others, creating a network of effects that must be managed continuously. And this network does not settle into a final configuration, because each adjustment introduces new variations that require further response. And this cascading pattern reflects a principle that has been present throughout human biology, that complexity increases the need for regulation, not the possibility of completion. And as the body moves through time, this complexity becomes more apparent, because accumulated changes alter how signals are interpreted, how responses are generated, and how systems coordinate with one another. And these alterations do not stop the resetting process. They reshape it, making it more distributed and less centralized, so that adjustments occur across multiple layers rather than within a single coordinated cycle. And this distribution ensures that the process remains active even when individual systems show variation, because the overall structure is designed to maintain function through redundancy and flexibility. And this design has roots in early human environments, where conditions were rarely consistent, and where the ability to adapt across time was more important than the ability to maintain a fixed state. And under those conditions, the body developed a system that could continue operating even as individual components changed, relying on continuous adjustment rather than on perfect restoration. And this reliance becomes more visible as time passes, where the resetting process extends beyond nightly cycles and becomes part of a broader pattern of regulation that spans days, months, and years. And within this pattern, the body is not aiming to return to an earlier state, but to maintain coherence under new conditions. And this maintenance requires ongoing recalibration, as the system integrates past changes with present demands, and because these demands are always evolving, the process cannot reach a point of completion. There is always another adjustment required, another interaction to manage, another variation to integrate, and this continuous need for adjustment reveals that aging is not a movement away from resetting, but a deeper immersion into it, where the body depends more heavily on its ability to adapt continuously and less on the possibility of achieving a stable endpoint. And this perspective shifts the way the process is understood, from something that becomes weaker over time to something that becomes more essential, even as it becomes more complex. And when viewed in this way, the body's nightly activity is part of a larger continuity that extends across the lifespan, linking each cycle of rest and activity into an ongoing process that never fully resolves. And within that process, the idea of a complete reset becomes less meaningful because the system is not designed to finish its work, but to sustain it, carrying forward adjustments across time, maintaining balance through change, and continuing to operate quietly and persistently without ever reaching a final state. And in that continuous movement, the resetting process reveals itself not as something that fades with time, but as something that remains, adapting, evolving, and never fully complete. When the focus shifts to the conditions of modern life, another layer of the resetting process becomes visible, one that shows how the environment has changed more rapidly than the systems that regulate the body, and this difference creates a subtle tension, because the body continues to operate according to patterns shaped over long periods of human history, while the surrounding environment introduces signals that do not always align with those patterns. And this misalignment does not stop the resetting process, but it alters how it unfolds, making it more fragmented and less synchronized with external cues. And this can be understood through widely accepted observations about how exposure to artificial light, irregular schedules, and controlled environments influence the body's internal timing, not by replacing it, but by shifting its alignment. And these shifts do not occur instantly, they unfold gradually, as the body attempts to reconcile its internal rhythms with new patterns of input, and during this period, the system remains active, adjusting continuously, but without reaching a stable configuration, because the inputs themselves are often inconsistent, changing from one day to the next. And this inconsistency introduces a form of variability that the body must manage, requiring additional adjustments that extend across multiple cycles. And this extension reflects a broader principle that the resetting process is not confined to a single night, but spans across time, integrating past and present conditions into an ongoing pattern of regulation. And in modern environments, where patterns of activity and rest can vary widely, this integration becomes more complex because the signals that guide it are less predictable, and this unpredictability prevents the system from settling into a consistent rhythm, requiring the body to remain flexible, capable of adjusting its internal state in response to changing conditions. And this flexibility has roots in early human environments, where variability was also present, but the nature of that variability was different, shaped by natural cycles that, while not perfectly uniform, followed patterns that could be anticipated over time. And in contrast, modern variability often lacks this continuity, introducing abrupt changes that the body must respond to without the gradual transitions it evolved to expect. And this difference does not break the system, but it increases the demand for ongoing adjustment as the body works to maintain balance under conditions that are less predictable. And this increased demand reveals that the resetting process is not something that can be completed and then left unchanged. It must remain active, continuously adapting to new inputs. And this adaptation is not limited to the night, it extends into the day, where patterns of light, activity, and environment continue to influence internal regulation, creating a continuous loop of adjustment that never fully resolves. And within this loop, the idea of a complete reset becomes even less applicable, because the system is not operating under stable conditions that would allow for completion. It is operating within a flow of changing inputs that require constant recalibration, and this recalibration is what allows the body to function across modern conditions, preserving enough stability to support daily activity while remaining open to further change. And when viewed in this way, the influence of modern life does not stop the body from resetting, it reveals more clearly that the process was never meant to finish, but to continue, adapting to each new condition as it arises, and carrying forward adjustments across time, just as it has done throughout human history, where the body learned not to rely on completion, but to sustain a process of continuous change that allows it to remain functional in a world that is always evolving and never fully stable. As these modern conditions continue to interact with the body's internal systems, another detail becomes clearer. The challenge is not that the body has lost its ability to reset, but that it must now interpret signals that do not follow the patterns it evolved to expect. And this creates a situation where internal processes remain active, but their timing and coordination are influenced by inputs that are more fragmented, and this fragmentation can be seen in how light is no longer tied strictly to natural cycles, how activity can extend into periods that were once reserved for rest, and how environmental conditions can remain stable even when internal rhythms anticipate change. And this difference does not stop the resetting process, but it introduces a form of misalignment where internal signals and external cues no longer move together as closely as they once did. And this misalignment requires continuous adjustment as the body works to reconcile differences between its internal timing and the signals it receives. And this reconciliation is not a single correction. It unfolds across multiple cycles, with each night contributing to a gradual recalibration. And during this time, the system remains in motion, adjusting its patterns in response to both recent inputs and accumulated history. And this ongoing adjustment reflects a principle that has been present throughout human biology, that the body does not depend on perfect conditions to function, it depends on its ability to adapt to imperfect ones. And this adaptability is what allows the resetting process to continue, even when signals are inconsistent, because the system is designed to operate within variability, maintaining balance through continuous change rather than through fixed alignment. And this becomes especially apparent when we consider that the body continues to prepare for rest, even when external cues suggest otherwise, adjusting internal signals in anticipation of patterns that may no longer be clearly defined. And this anticipation can lead to further adjustments as the system refines its response in real time, creating a layered pattern where preparation and correction overlap. And this overlap prevents the system from reaching a final state, because there is always another adjustment in progress, another signal being integrated, another shift being accommodated. And this continuous integration reveals that the resetting process is not something that can be separated from the conditions in which it occurs. It is shaped by those conditions, evolving in response to them. And in modern environments, where variability is often less predictable, this evolution becomes more complex, requiring the body to manage a wider range of inputs without relying on consistent patterns. And this complexity does not eliminate the process, it extends it, increasing the need for ongoing recalibration. And this recalibration does not end with the night. It continues into the day, where new inputs further influence the system, creating a continuous loop that links rest and activity into a single flow of adjustment. And within this flow, the idea of a complete reset becomes less relevant, because the system is not designed to return to a fixed baseline. It is designed to maintain function across changing conditions, and this design has been shaped by the same principles that have guided human adaptation across time, where survival depended not on achieving stability, but on sustaining adaptability. And within that context, the body does not stop resetting in modern life. It continues, adjusting to each new condition, integrating each new signal, and maintaining a balance that is always in motion and never fully complete. As these layers of modern influence continue to interact with the body, a deeper pattern begins to take shape, one that shows how the resetting process is not being disrupted in a way that stops it, but is instead being stretched across more conditions, requiring the body to remain in a state of ongoing adjustment for longer periods of time. And this extension changes how the process is experienced, not by removing it, but by making it more distributed, less contained within the boundaries of night, and more intertwined with the flow of daily activity. And this can be understood through the way internal systems respond to signals that no longer arrive in clear sequences, where periods of light and darkness, activity and rest, are no longer strictly separated. And this blending introduces new patterns that the body must interpret, adjusting its internal timing in response to inputs that may conflict or overlap. And this interpretation is not immediate. It unfolds gradually as the system recalibrates itself across multiple cycles, integrating new patterns with existing ones, and during this process, the body does not pause its resetting, it continues, but under conditions that require more frequent correction, more flexibility, and more interaction between systems. And this increased interaction reflects a broader principle, that when variability increases, the need for coordination also increases, and this coordination does not resolve into a stable state, because the inputs themselves remain variable, and this creates a situation where the body is always adjusting, always refining its response, and never reaching a point where no further adjustment is needed. And this pattern is not entirely new. It echoes conditions from early human environments, where variability was also present, but the nature of that variability followed patterns that could be anticipated over time, whereas in modern settings, the variability can be more fragmented, less predictable, and more dependent on behavior than on natural cycles, and this difference requires the body to rely more heavily on its internal capacity for adaptation rather than on external consistency, and this reliance increases the importance of the resetting process, because it becomes the primary means by which the system maintains balance, even as the conditions that shape it become more complex. And this does not mean that the process becomes complete. It means that it becomes more continuous, extending across both night and day, linking them into a single flow of adjustment that does not pause, and within this flow, the boundaries between rest and activity become less distinct, as the body carries forward its adjustments from one phase into the next, and this continuity reveals that the resetting process is not confined to a specific time or state. It is a constant feature of how the body operates, adapting to each new condition as it arises, and maintaining function through ongoing recalibration, and this recalibration is shaped by both internal patterns and external inputs, creating a system that is always in motion, always integrating, and always adjusting. And this movement reflects a long history of adaptation, where the body has learned to function within changing environments by sustaining a process rather than completing it. And in that sense, modern life does not introduce the need for resetting. It reveals its true nature more clearly, showing that it was never meant to end, but to continue quietly and persistently across every cycle and across time itself, without ever reaching a final state of completion. When all of these layers are considered together, from the environment and internal timing to energy, memory, and hormonal activity, a final pattern begins to emerge, one that suggests the body is not organized around the idea of reaching a finished state, but around the ability to remain within a process that continues across time. And this pattern becomes most visible when we stop looking for a point where everything settles, and instead observe how each system contributes to a balance that is always temporary, always shifting, and always dependent on ongoing adjustment. And this does not mean the body lacks stability. It means that its stability is maintained through change, through the constant movement of signals, resources, and responses that keep the system within a range that supports function. And this range is not fixed. It adapts to conditions, reflecting both the immediate environment and the accumulated history of the organism, and this adaptive balance has roots in the earliest stages of human existence, where survival depended not on achieving a perfect internal state, but on maintaining enough coherence to respond to a world that was never fully predictable. And under those conditions, the body developed a structure that does not aim to complete its work, but to carry it forward, allowing each adjustment to lead into the next, forming a continuous chain that links nights and days into a single flow, and within this flow, the idea of a reset changes. It is no longer a moment of return, but a phase of reconfiguration where the system adjusts just enough to continue, without ever reaching a point where no further change is needed. And this perspective helps explain why the body can feel both restored and unfinished at the same time, because restoration is not the elimination of imbalance. It is the temporary alignment of systems that allows activity to resume, and this alignment is always partial, always influenced by factors that remain in motion. And this partial nature is not a limitation, it is a feature that allows the system to remain flexible, capable of adapting to new conditions without becoming fixed. And this flexibility is what has allowed human biology to persist across a wide range of environments, where conditions could shift rapidly, and where the ability to adjust continuously was more valuable than the ability to stabilize completely. And when viewed in this way, The body's nightly activity is not an attempt to return to a baseline, but a continuation of a process that never fully stops, shaped by the same principles that have guided it across generations, where each cycle contributes to a larger pattern of regulation that extends beyond any single moment. And within this pattern, the body is not moving toward completion, it is maintaining motion, sustaining a balance that is always in progress. And this understanding reframes the idea of rest, not as an endpoint, but as part of a continuous process that allows the body to remain functional across time, even as conditions change, and even as the system itself evolves. And in that sense, the question is no longer why the body never stops resetting, but whether it was ever meant to stop at all, or whether its design has always been to continue, quietly and without conclusion, carrying forward its adjustments into each new moment and leaving the process open, unfinished, and ongoing. As this perspective settles in, another shift begins to take place, not within the body itself, but in how the process is understood, because what once appeared as a limitation, the inability to fully complete the nightly reset, can now be seen as a necessary condition for continuity. And this reframing changes the meaning of rest, from something that should bring closure to something that sustains movement, allowing the system to remain adaptable across time. And this adaptability is not an abstract idea. It is expressed through the way each system continues its work, without requiring a final endpoint, maintaining a balance that is always sufficient but never absolute. And this sufficiency is what allows the body to function, even when conditions are not ideal, even when signals are misaligned, and even when internal states are still in transition. And this pattern reflects a deeper principle that has guided human biology across generations, where survival did not depend on achieving perfect conditions, but on maintaining enough stability to continue. And this continuity required a system that could operate within uncertainty, adjusting continuously rather than waiting for completion. And over time, this led to a structure where processes are designed to overlap, to interact, and to remain open rather than to close. And this openness is what makes the resetting process ongoing, because there is always another adjustment that can be made, another signal that can be integrated, another variation that can be accommodated. And this does not mean that the system is inefficient. It means that it is responsive, capable of adapting to change without losing coherence. And this responsiveness becomes especially important when we consider that the conditions shaping the body are never static. They evolve across time, influenced by environment, activity, and internal variation. And within this evolving context, a system that aims for completion would struggle to keep pace, while a system that remains in motion can continue to adjust, maintaining function across changing conditions. And this is what defines the body's relationship with the night, not as a period of final restoration, but as a phase within a continuous process, where adjustments are made, carried forward, and integrated into the next cycle. And this integration does not erase what came before, it builds upon it, creating a flow that connects past, present, and future into a single pattern of regulation. And within this pattern, the idea of a complete reset becomes less relevant, because the system is not designed to return to a fixed state. It is designed to remain adaptable, always adjusting, always integrating, and always continuing. And this continuity is what allows the body to persist across time, not by finishing its work, but by sustaining it. And in doing so, it reveals that the resetting process is not something that fails to complete, but something that was never meant to, because its purpose is not to end, but to continue quietly and steadily across each night and into each day, maintaining a balance that is always in motion and always unfinished. As this continuous movement of adjustment carries through every system, from the smallest internal signal to the broader patterns shaped by environment and time, a final understanding begins to settle, one that does not close the process, but gently reframes it, because what has been described across each layer is not a system that fails to complete its work, but a system that is designed to remain unfinished in a very specific way. And this unfinished state is not a gap or a flaw, it is the condition that allows life to continue, because a system that fully completed its adjustments would have no capacity left to respond, no space to integrate new information, and no flexibility to adapt to change. And in contrast, a system that remains slightly open, slightly incomplete, can continue to move, to adjust, and to carry forward its activity into the next moment. And this openness is what defines the body's relationship with rest, where each night does not bring closure, but creates a temporary alignment, enough to support the transition into the next day. And this alignment is always partial, always influenced by conditions that extend beyond the present moment, and always shaped by the accumulated history of the organism. And this accumulation does not resolve into a final state. It continues to evolve, linking each cycle into a broader pattern that extends across time. And within this pattern, the body is not seeking an endpoint. It is maintaining continuity, allowing each adjustment to lead into the next, forming a chain that never fully closes. And this chain reflects a principle that has guided human biology since its earliest stages, where survival depended not on reaching a perfect state, but on sustaining a process that could continue under changing conditions. And this perspective brings the idea of resetting into a quieter, more grounded view, where the process is no longer seen as something that should finish, but as something that must remain active, because it is through this activity that the body preserves its ability to function. And this preservation does not require completion. It requires balance, a balance that is always in motion, always being recalibrated, and always adapting to new inputs. And this adaptive balance is what allows the body to carry forward, even when conditions are not ideal, even when signals are misaligned, and even when the sense of rest feels incomplete. And within this understanding, the experience of waking up changes slightly, becoming less about whether the body has finished its work and more about whether it has adjusted enough to continue. And this subtle shift in perspective reveals that the body does not need to fully reset in order to function. It needs only to remain within the flow of adjustment, where each cycle contributes to a larger continuity that extends beyond any single night. And this continuity is what has allowed human life to persist across environments, across generations, and across time, not by completing its processes, but by sustaining them quietly and without interruption. And as this understanding settles, it leaves behind a final question that does not seek an answer, but simply remains gently open. If the body has never been designed to fully reset, then what we call rest may not be a return, but a pause within a movement that never truly stops. And if that movement is always continuing, then perhaps the question is not how to complete it, but how it has carried us this far without ever needing to.